Hi, I'm David Dye, the author of Tomorrow Together Essays of Hope, Healing, and Humanity, president of Let's Grow Leaders. And some of the worst advice I ever received was do your best.
Do your best is worst advice, David Dye? Come on, how's that bad?
How's that bad? Well, it's something I actually wrote about. Here's the problem. So I was a Boy Scout, Phil. I was for Cub Scout, Boy Scout, and of course Boy Scout motto: do your best, which I really took to heart and overplayed, because here's the thing: you can only do your best in a very few small categories. Everything else, good enough, is good enough. You got to save your best for where it really counts.
Oh, I like that. So, how do we know where it really counts, David? How do we know?
Oh, I think that comes down to knowing your values. What is it that matters most for you? What are you trying to do with your life? And everybody's on a different journey in terms of what those things are. And so that's where I want to put my best effort in. And so, like, a practical way that came home for me was early in my first marriage. I was a father, I was married, and I was also trying to be a master level chess player. I had enjoyed chess recreationally when I was a kid, started studying seriously in college, and then I really got into like tournaments and trying to be really good at it. And what I found is that I finally found a way to do it, had the right coaching, the right technique, everything else. And it was going to consume so much of my time to be the best I could be at that, that I would have had to have sacrificed something that mattered more, which was being the best at being a father and a husband. And so at that point, I said, all right, time to set aside that dream. That's not a dream I'm
Mm,
going to pursue anymore. And so that's just, figuring out as you get clarity around your own values and what matters to you. And then, okay, where are you going to put that time and effort?
wow, wow. That now that makes so much sense, right? That's so clear that's actually terrible advice. Don't always do your best. Do it, do what you need to. I like that. So with that, right? Clearly you did your best with this, right? This is awesome. Congratulations on the book, right? Tomorrow Together, Essays of Hope, Healing, and Humanity. But I have to ask, David, as I'm flipping through this, I'm like, when do you know you're done with an essay book? Like, how did you know that you're like, okay, these are the essays that I'm finally gonna say, okay, this is my best. Here you go. Let's print.
That is a great question, Phil. And I think you've talked to enough different authors in your lifetime to know. In fact, I'm confident you know that no book is ever done, it's only published. And that's the reality, is at some point you have to pull the trigger. So I reached a point in the time frame I had given myself. I gave myself a finishing line. We call it schedule to finish around here from a leadership management perspective, but gave myself the finish line and said, all right, this is when I want to be done and ready to move forward. And as I had written and looked through the collection and pulled everything together, what's there was there. And I've continued to write. I've written more since then, but that will be for a future collection or social media or Medium or what have you. But this collection is what it is as of that finishing line.
Cool. No, I've of course heard that, right? We have to at some point you have to just go. And I love that you are open enough to share that, because even though as authors, right, we might say that to each other, often we don't say that live. And I know that's a hallmark of your leadership, David, is you're a very vulnerable guy. You're willing to be open and share and all of that. Has that always been the case? Have you always been that guy who's been able to do that? Or when did that happen? When did that transition happen?
I have not thought about that way, Phil. In fact, I would, as you were saying that, hey, you're a vulnerable guy. You've always been open and transparent. This book marks a new level of that for me. There are stories in here I have never shared publicly with the world. Some of my closest friends read some of these and said, I did not know that. And oh my. And that wasn't intentional. I just hadn't shared it. And I wasn't necessarily withholding it from my very close circle, but I hadn't shared things that were a meaningful part of my life. And as you say, leadership. So I think that's been an evolution and a growth. And I have found that I will tell you, when I was younger, no, when I was younger, I was like so many other folks who I don't want to be vulnerable. I want to have all the answers. I want to be the smart one. I want to, get the prestige of knowing what's what. And life has a way, if you let it, of teaching you that doesn't work. And I would say through a series of really difficult circumstances in my life over the years, um, and brokenness and learning wow, I really do need other people, and I don't have all the answers. And the beauty of that and having the right questions, and this is a book that's got a lot of questions in it, but from a leadership perspective, from a life perspective, I'm learning to value being curious and having the right questions way more than trying to have all the answers.
I love that. Yeah, curiosity is a great quality as a salesperson, and it's a even better quality as a leader, because if we can get curious to our team and understand, why do you do what you do? How does that help you? What's holding you back? What are your real dreams, your aspirations? I think we're able to lead more effectively and more vulnerably, because if we share first, we make it safe for them to go. Is that what you found too, David?
Oh, absolutely. If you can show up real and authentic, and that doesn't mean like throwing up all over people and airing all your dirty laundry. That's not what authenticity is about. But if you can be real and be a human being with strengths and areas you're not as good at, which we all have, it's not a secret. And if we can show up that way, that gives other people permission to show up the same way. And that's, as you said, sales, leadership, relationships, any kind of human interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of the things that you said very early in the book is something that stuck with me as I read through it. And honestly, you could have said this in a lot of the chapters, and that is, you said, you can't heal without acknowledging the injury. Can you explain that a little bit more, and how that plays out in the leaders that you coach and that you train and work with?
Yeah. So let's just take that sentence in and of itself. So, a wound, if you cut your arm, and you keep it covered, it's going to fester, right? It's got to be cleaned out, exposed to air. We have to acknowledge the wound. Everybody's familiar with like AA and Alcoholics Anonymous. In order to heal, you have to first acknowledge, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, and then take your step forward. So, the context in which I write that in the book is I'm telling the story of a woman I met, a very, very talented, high caliber spinal care specialist. She was the medical director at a hospital. She was a Black woman, and in the United States, for your international listeners. And as we were talking, she was describing a situation to me, and I went, "Wait, now what?" And I said, "That can't be." And she just smiled at me. And it was one of these, I never forgot that smile. It was a long suffering smile that said, without saying a word, "Oh, David, you ignorant white dude who's never, ever had to live the realities I've had to live." And it's a smile I have received several times over the course of my life from different people in different groups who are not in the dominant groups in our society. And as we talked about it and explored what was going on there for her, she was explaining the reality of having to be 10 times as good, to never be able to make a mistake, just to compete at the same level of people who are in the in group in her field, and the results and consequences that had for her. Which, and to her credit, I mean, amazing human being and all that she had achieved. Well, in order for us to solve any of that, to make any of it better, we have to acknowledge that that exists and has existed. And we live in a world where that is challenging for people to do. And so as leaders, you were asking about leadership. As that's a human thing for all of us that are in every society, and every society has those things, whether you're in the US or not, to acknowledge them first before we can work on them. Well, from a leadership perspective, the issues that your team, your organization faces, if we don't acknowledge those and we're not willing to be vulnerable ourselves and acknowledge that improvement is possible, we'll never be able to take forward steps. We just can't.
Mm, yeah. So really believing others' story. And I say story, I guess there's air quotes around that, because I don't mean story as far as made up fiction like my 7-year-old tells. I mean, right, our story is our story, and that's the truth, right, for us. So with that, why is it so difficult, do you think, David, for people to acknowledge this story, the wound, if you will, as as a leader or as a human?
I think there's several things that come up there, and there are people who are experts in this and have written about it and studied it extensively. But based on my own experience and kind of lived experience of this, I think shame is one factor that Okay, if I'm a leader and I've helped create this situation and someone brings it to my attention and I acknowledge it, I have to recognize that I was not as good as I had hoped I would be. And if we have not, as human beings or leaders, learned how to deal with that reality, which is a healthy part of human development, right? To do that well, to go, wow, that was not my best. That's not who I want to be. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Sucks. Now I'm going to do some things differently. That's kind of the healthy, forward, effective way to deal with it. But took me a long time to learn that, and I know that's the case for a lot of other human beings too. And instead, we can get stuck in shame and or denial because it hurts too much, or if I acknowledge it, now I'm responsible to do something different about it. And I may not know what that is. And so now I've got to go through the learning process. Well, that all of those things sometimes make it feel easier for a person to go, no, I don't want to acknowledge that. Because if I acknowledge it, now I've got to deal all this other junk I got to deal with. Well, I always say leadership is a matter, it's not if problems, but which problems. Which problems do you want to deal with? They're going to be there one way or the other. So you get to choose which ones you want.
I like that. Yeah, that's which problems. That's so very true, right? So very true. So that's so interesting. That you would mention that the whole which problem, because I do think that plays back to your best comment at the beginning, right? That not every problem deserves our energy and our attention, and that. I would imagine that you would say that we'd get back to our values, right, to determine which problems matter. And maybe that's the real issue there, is that we don't value that diversity. We don't value that. And by diversity, I mean diversity of thought, right? That maybe it's shame, maybe it's something else, or maybe it's right, maybe it's me and I need improvement. Maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's it too.
Yeah. I had, as a speaker, in the work that we do, my kind of day job, run a leadership development company. And so do a ton of training and leadership development, practical leadership skills for leaders, managers all over the world. But one time, a couple years right before the pandemic, I was delivering a keynote outside of Detroit. And I shared a story from the stage that I have shared hundreds of times over the years about an individual who is very inspiring to me. And I had a woman come up after the keynote and she said, David, I acknowledge your heart. I know where you're trying to go. And I got to tell you, that came across offensive to me. And she was very sweet and kind hearted about it. And I said, oh my goodness. It rocked me, Phil. I was like, what? It's a story I had vetted with many other people. The individual who's the subject of the story, I had shared it and we had told together over back in the history. And she said, and there are other people in this audience, guarantee you they feel the same way. Well, okay, now I've got information. And my, initial reaction to that is like, whew, that is not who I am. It's not, it's that defensiveness. It's not who I am. That's not what I'm trying to do. You don't understand. It's not fair. Who cares about any of that, right? The reality is it was causing pain for other people. Wasn't my intent, but now that I know it's causing pain, now I have a choice. What do I want to do with it? Do I want to continue to cause that pain? Do I want to find a better way? And it's one of those things that we can get tied down in that shame cycle and everything else, and there's no need for it. And I talked to a friend of mine who is a great resource for me in all of these things. And I called him. I said, listen, this is what happened. I'm struggling with this. And he said, sounds pretty cut and dry to me. You got some new information. What are you going to do with it? It's just like, there's nothing to get all wrapped around the axle on. It's, you learn something. Now, what are you going to do? And that's just life. We're always, hopefully, always learning and getting new information and having an opportunity to do something different.
Yeah, new data leads to new discovery, and new discovery hopefully leads to new decisions.
Hopefully.
So, yeah, hopefully, right? Because we don't always move with that. So that's here's hoping that that those listening, right, discover something new and would make a new decision for them, so, and others, because we don't know the impact, and when we know better, I think we should do better. So that's
right.
Maya
Angelou. So yep. When we know better, we can
right?
do better.
Yep, absolutely. So with that, one of the other stories that I found inside the book that was super interesting to me was the story of you and Robert in the suit up story. I thought that was so interesting because comparison is often the thief of joy. We hear that, but this is comparison in a different way, right? We had different stories here. So can you elaborate on the suit up story for me and
Yeah,
maybe share that?
absolutely. There are so many stories in Tomorrow Together that are stories about shifts in perspective and how our perspective can change and how vital it is that it does. But this was a very funny one for me, and it took, I don't know, 25 years for it to happen, something like that. So when I was in high school, I grew up in poverty, and I was the oldest of 6 kids. And I was in speech and debate. I've always had a soft spot for those things, and like many of us, uh, and there was a peer of mine, same grade, named Robert, and he was a really good debater. He was like the top debater, and I really wanted to be like him. I emulated, I learned from him, and he had this awesome suit that he wore, and I was like, "Dang, I got to get me a suit." So Phil, I was sweeping gas stations, scrubbing the floor. I mean, the what do they call that? The parking area where all the oil goes and scrubbing the grease and everything. And for like 6 months, I saved up until I could buy a suit. And I still remembered it was a charcoal gray suit. And I had this like floral bluish green with tie with red flowers. And I was so happy when I finally got my suit and could be like Robert. I mean, and at that point, I think Robert had 2 suits. Uh, and we went on and we both did really well. Our senior year, we went to nationals. He finished like 19th in the nation. I finished 20th right behind him. It was fantastic. Great speech debate career. Okay. He goes off to university. I never see him again. Facebook happens. We reconnect on Facebook. On his 40th birthday, that month, he started posting reflections from his life to celebrate his 40th birthday, which is cool. One of the reflections was about his raggedy old secondhand suit. And I think what I might not have mentioned, Robert was black. And in his reflections, he shares about the discrimination he faced, the as good as he was with his speaking and his debate skills, he also got coached that he needed to pay attention to his presentation, his clothing, and so forth, because of whether or not he was going to be taken seriously because of the discrimination and the uphill battle he'd automatically face. So his uncle gave him 2 hand-me-down suits that he was embarrassed to wear, as it turns out. And he said, "Oh, I hated those suits. I was like, I want a good suit." And he's telling about this in this Facebook post, and it blew my mind. Here, the kid that I always looked up to as being put together, having it all going on, having the suits and everything that I wanted to be like, he was lamenting his own situation because they were threadbare in places and secondhand. And he came over the years to appreciate, as he had the opportunity to reflect on his life, to appreciate what those suits represented and the idea of suiting up and putting on your uniform for whatever it is you're getting ready to do and the mentality that that brings. And so I chatted with him about that after as I commented on his post. I said, "That is so funny. Let me give you my perspective." And I asked him if I could share that story of the book because, uh, you know, like you said, comparison is the thief of joy. And here we are both feeling less than and lacking without any need to do that. And of course, 2 kids, we're not comparing those stories or anything else at the time. It's not till we're 40 years old that we're doing that. But that was a powerful experience that took decades for a perspective shift to happen.
Yeah, it was so fascinating when I read that. I remember, I grew up in poverty too, and I remember my grandmother got me my first suit in my between my freshman and sophomore year of college. We went to the department store, like the only department store. It was
Yeah.
40 miles away, and got the only suit we could afford. It was also charcoal gray, and so I'm reading
Wrong
this, and I'm
choice.
like wow, so interesting that would happen to you as well. So yeah, just yeah, good stuff. Deep connection for me when I read that, and we didn't have any people of color in my school, so I didn't have the same thing that you had. But I know that I heard, right, because being in poverty, right, it show up. Presentation matters. They will possibly overlook your poorness if only you show up correctly.
Yeah.
And then I read that right into your point about, especially what, 20, 30 years ago, it was a very different time. It was a very, very much more segregated time, at least in our thinking. Maybe schools were integrated. I mean, technically, I guess that happened in 54 with Ruby Bridges, but nonetheless, that, that attitude that maybe that, I don't know, maybe that still hasn't changed, David. I don't know.
It's, I mean, change is happening. I would acknowledge change is happening, and it takes every one of us every day to keep it happening.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it takes understanding that there is better before we can know better, before we can do better.
Yeah,
It's seeing
exactly.
what's possible, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Those perspective shifts are so huge for me. There's another story I share in the book, Tomorrow Together, about when this was very young, 11, 12 years old. And I grew up in Denver, on the west side of Denver. So I got used to seeing downtown Denver from one angle. And it's what I knew downtown to look like. One day, my friend's mom drives us over to her work, which is on the east side of downtown, but we're laying down flat in a pickup truck because it's February. Again, a way the world was different. You did that back then. It's February in Denver. It's cold, and I was not dressed for this wind. So we're all laying down flat, shivering, holding up. And we pull into her job, and I sit up, and I'm now on a different side of downtown Denver than I've ever seen before. And it kind of was like mind blowing, like, whoa, where's this is not what and once I settled down from that, I got to thinking about it. And because there were families and kids around, I'm like, wait a minute, this is the only angle of downtown that they know. They don't know my angle. Oh my word. It was one of those moments of recognition about different perspectives that just has always stuck with me.
Yeah. I totally resonated with that one too. I saw that. I was like, yeah, that is very true. Growing up in a small town, there's a lot of this is all we know. And so, being exposed to different perspectives is powerful and can be mind blowing if we let it be. And then some, some never leave. So with that, I I, I got two more pieces here that I want to talk about. One is the idea of the bonsai tree. I read that story and I was like, really, like your favorite national museum, national monument, national park is the bonsai tree? Talk to me about that, David. That blew my mind.
All right. So, well, first, I love nature. I love the outdoors, and I love trees in general and birds and all the rest of it. But um, the this was 2010, 2000, yeah, 2010. I went to DC, daughter's spring break, high school senior year. So spring break trip, we take her to DC. So again, I'm living in Colorado. And visit all the normal places. I had one extra day in DC. Like, wow, where are we going to go that we haven't been? And so look up what are the things people don't all know about. And we had a choice. There was this one cool trail we could do, which I like, or there was the Arboretum and Bonsai Museum. Like, oh gosh, well, my wife wasn't feeling all that great that day. Is like, okay, let's not hike. Let's go to the Arboretum and Museum. Blew my mind, Phil. The National Arboretum is amazing. Everybody should see it in DC. It's not by the mall. You have to drive or take a cab or whatever, or Uber. And in the center of that is the National Bonsai Museum, which has an amazing collection of bonsai trees. And at the heart of that collection, there are several just amazing trees. But one of them, I've seen this tree numerous times, and it has made me cry. Like I actually took a date to see this tree one time, and she's taking photographs of it, everything. She looks at me and turns around. And she's like, you are tearing up at this tree. You're adorable. Which I found out later, by the way, for listeners, that's code for no second date. But nonetheless, I'm not ashamed. Why is that tree so moving? It's nearly 400 years old. And so if you know anything about bonsai trees, they require almost daily care. So you think about 400 years of family after family of these Japanese gardeners taking care of this tree. And it's beautiful. And any bonsai, it's a work of art, and they're sculpted. They're magnificent. And then in addition to the age and care and artistry, this tree survived the atomic bombing at Hiroshima. It was just a mile from ground zero. And then that tree was gifted to the United States as part of the centerpiece of the collection that became the museum. for the bicentennial celebration, 1976. So when I look at that tree, I see the totality of human discipline and artistry and diligence and commitment, war, peace, art, beauty, all of it, it just in this one tree. And there's so many others in the collection. So I was asking that first visit, the first time I ever went, I saw this and it's blowing my mind. And I asked one of the gardeners, he's pushing a cart around with his tweezers and things. I said, I didn't know anything about bonsai. I said, how do you make these trees so beautiful? And so he's an older gentleman. He looks at me and he says, son, you don't make a tree do anything. And I'm like, okay, you're messing with me, but what do you mean? He said, no, our job isn't to make the tree do anything. It's to take care of the tree, to cultivate the tree, and we reveal its beauty. So we got to find, every tree has its own beauty. We got to find that. That's what the sculptor, that's what the artist does. And they will help guide the tree into that and prune it and everything to reveal, and then protect it from disease and give it sun, water, everything else. That's our job. So I'm flying home from that, Phil, and it was one of these things like, man, that was such a amazing experience. Last day in DC's daughter's spring break, everything else. We're taking her home. And as we're flying back, I'm thinking about it from a leadership perspective, that people are a lot like trees too. You can't make another human do anything. I mean, maybe I was an older brother, so sometimes I'd make my sister punch themselves. I mean, other than that, right? Like, I know I was a jerk, but apart from that kind of a thing, you can't make another human being do anything. And that's not our job. Our job is to cultivate, to give people an environment where their best, their strengths, their talents, their energy, enthusiasm can be released in really positive ways. And so that's whether we're a leader, a parent, a friend, what have you. That's the metaphor that really set in for me as I was thinking about my experience the first time I encountered that tree.
That's interesting. So that's interesting because I'm guessing that was before you'd partnered up with Karen, right? So you moved from cultivating leaders to now growing leaders, which I think is super interesting. So, is there a difference for you between cultivation and growth, or is that kind of just the natural progression, or what's that?
Yeah. So the name of our company is Let's Grow Leaders, so international leadership consultancy. There are parallels, I guess, is what I would say. So I still maintain that when it comes to leadership, you can't force people to do anything, and I can't force somebody to grow. What I can do is cultivate and give them the environment in which they can grow. And so from leadership development perspective, we want to talk about what you're trying to accomplish. What are your pain points? From a business perspective, what are you trying to achieve? From a leadership, inspiration, motivation perspective, what are you trying to achieve? Because one of the things I maintain, you can't motivate people. Motivation is internal. So a tree is going to grow and bloom and do all the things that it's going to do if you water it, give it sun, fertilize it, protect it from disease, prune it when it needs it. It's the same thing with teams, with people, with human beings. And it's not that we're pruning. Hopefully we're not, pruning any limbs, but there's a parallel in terms of accountability. Like when we're doing something that's not healthy for the team, not effective, or out of line with the direction the organization's going, we need to talk about that. We need to have those conversations. And so that happens as well as the nourishing, the encouragement, and all those elements.
Yeah. Wow. Good stuff. Good stuff. So if I was to say that there's one word that encapsulates your book, for me, it would be hope. The book is full of hope. Every story in there makes me hope for a better tomorrow together. I titled our episode today, Hope for a Better Tomorrow Together, because that's what I hope for folks. David, if you were to pick one word for your book, what would it be and why?
I would have gone with hope as well. That is definitely the message, the theme of the book for me. There's 44 different essays and all kinds of different, some of them are wry observation, my lived experience, other bits of things from history and different things like you would expect in a collection of essays. But the theme through all of them is that we can have a better tomorrow. Despite what is often the case for many people, it doesn't matter what your political perspective is, doesn't matter what country you live in. It's a tougher time for many human beings right now because we are in an environment of rapid change, and social media has done a lot of things that aren't healthy for us, and we haven't quite figured out how to manage through all that yet. It's done a lot of things that are awesome for us too, but we're dealing with a lot of crud right now between the pandemic and, a war that threatens to engulf the world, and the resurgence of white nationalism. You got all these kinds of things that are going on around the world, and that can be frustrating, but there's hope. And that hope is in one another, if we can find our way to one another. And I believe in the depths of my soul it's possible. And that's really what the theme and the through line of all these essays is about.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I got that, David. There's so much there. As you said, 44 essays. We could talk about all of them, but I would encourage folks, go get a copy of the book, right? It's called Tomorrow Together. David Dye was a guest today. You can go to letsgrowleaders.com. Check that out. It's on Amazon as well. David, as always, man, you always share some great stuff. Is there one more thing that you'd like to share, maybe to help people get more aligned with building a better tomorrow together?
Oh, I'm going to go with one more perspective change. I know perspective seems to be a theme in our conversation today. One of the essays I share is called Standing Still, and it's got nothing to do with me. It's just human experience. Is you wonder, like, even when you're standing still, when you think you're not moving at all, you are moving at hundreds of thousands of miles per hour in totality, because you think about how fast the planet's spinning. If you're at the equator, that's 24,000 miles per hour. And then you've got the Earth is moving around the sun. And then you've got the sun, and all of the solar system is moving through space itself. And so even standing still, we are moving dizzyingly fast, but we don't see any of it because of our limited perspective. And so that kind of humility, going back to approaching life with curiosity, I just think there's so much power in that for all of us. And so for me, that moving through life with curiosity and acknowledging that, gosh, there's so much more I'm not aware of. Powerful stuff.
Absolutely. Hugely powerful stuff, right? So, folks, if you want a little bit more perspective, a little bit of shift, as I mentioned, right, get a copy of Tomorrow Together. David Dye, go to letsgrowleaders.com, pick it up on Amazon, or just get to know David Dye. He's on LinkedIn all the time. You can learn lots of great stuff from him. And David, I do have hope for a better tomorrow, and you're a big part of that. So thank you, my friend. I appreciate you so much.
As do I, and you are a part of that, Phil. I know you're working for a better tomorrow together. Thank you.